Okay, so getting right down to it. Again, we're going to start with Unit 5 tonight. Unit 5 deals with a variety of topics, but up to 27% of the multiple choice questions could deal with Unit 5. So Unit 5 has all to do with voting rights, elections, political parties, interest groups, and some of those things. These are the amendments that you need to be aware of that pertain to voting. Again, 15th Amendment deals with the voting rights for African Americans. It's a Reconstruction Amendment. 17th Amendment deals with the election of U.S. senators. Again, prior to the ratification of the 17th Amendment, U.S. senators were appointed by state legislatures. With the ratification of the 17th Amendment, U.S. senators are now elected via a popular vote, as is, just like the House of Representatives. 19th Amendment, just got to know it, deals with women's suffrage. 24th Amendment makes poll taxes illegal, so you can never be charged to vote. 26th Amendment, that one's for you guys. Vietnam era makes the federal voting age 18. Prior to the 26th Amendment, states were able to determine their voting ages. With the ratification of the 26th Amendment, again, right around the time of the Vietnam War, kind of in that same era, it is ratified and it creates the federal voting age of 18. Again, all of these expand the rights of voters. Other laws that I would be aware of pertaining to voting, the big one is the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and that deals with literacy tests. Again, literacy tests were another device that were used to disenfranchise African Americans. Okay, questions on any of the amendments? Again, tips, tricks to remember these. 15th Amendment, I use the acronym for Reconstruction Amendments. Again, Reconstruction Amendments are going to deal with mostly the rights of African Americans. So the 13th Amendment, it abolishes slavery. 14th Amendment deals with the expansion of rights of citizens. It includes the Due Process Clause and the Equal Protection Clause. Again, Due Process Clause used in selective incorporation, protecting civil liberties. Equal Protection Clause used in a variety of civil rights cases like Brown versus Board of Education, the one that you have to know. And then the 15th Amendment deals with voting rights based on race. So I remember 13, 14, 15 with an acronym: Free Citizens Vote. Free Citizens Vote. Again, free, ending slavery. 14th, extending citizenship rights via the due process and equal protection clauses. And 15th Amendment, voting, dealing with the rights of African Americans to vote, even though many states still tried to disenfranchise African Americans following the ratification of those amendments. 17th Amendment, 17 senators, 17 senators, 17 senators. 19th Amendment, you just have to know it, deals with women's suffrage. 24th Amendment, no trick, deals with poll taxes. 26th Amendment, my trick with this is I look at the number 26. 2 + 6 = 8. There's no way 8-year-olds, unless they are, geniuses at that age, are going to be able to make a logical vote, but 18-year-olds might. So that's how I remember those. Questions on any of those? All right, moving along then. Other models of voting behavior. These are some of the examples that I would know. So we have rational choice, retrospective, prospective, and party line. Starting with party line voting. Again, that is just simply voting for a candidate based on the letter behind their name. Okay, voting straight Democrat, straight Republican, regardless of what you know about them. But because that person has an R or a D next to their name, that's why they get votes. Okay. Again, very common. Rational choice voting is, again, based on the perception of, who you think is the best candidate for the job. Retrospective voting, voting based on the previous actions, behaviors of a politician. And then prospective voting, again, prospective voting, looking at what they might accomplish in the future. Okay. So those are some big ones. Ultimately, what affects voter turnout? There's a whole variety of things that go back to voter turnout. Demographics is a big factor in it. So like income levels, level of education, that type of thing. Generally speaking, who is more likely to vote, more or less educated people?
More.
Yeah, generally speaking, more educated people, and generally speaking, those that are in higher financial, I guess tax brackets, we'll say. Okay, those that make more money, generally speaking, will vote more. Now, that's not to say that those that are lower middle class or however don't vote, but generally speaking, those that come from a higher level of education or a higher level of income are more likely to vote. So that's one thing. You could have like structural barriers that could include like voter registration and voter ID. Again, North Dakota, we are the only state that does not require voter registration. You show up on the day of election day in North Dakota to vote as long as you have your state issued ID that is up to date, not expired, with your physical address. A PO box does not work. You're allowed to vote. Again, every other state, there's various registration rules. Some states actually you have to get a separate voting ID for, which can make it complicated, right? Because people might not understand the process. They might not have the means to go and get registered. So that's something to be aware of. Now, with the example of voter registration, another voting law to be aware of is what is called the Motor Voter Act. Okay, the Motor Voter Act, which more or less is a federal law that was passed that requires states, like at their DMVs. So if you go in and renew your driver's license, at the same time, you have to be offered the opportunity to renew your voter registration. Okay, again, they do that as a way of trying to, close that barrier, I guess, or to break down that barrier so that people, have less excuses as to why they couldn't register to vote. But that is the Motor Voter Act. Okay, the idea that when people go and renew their driver's licenses, that at the same time they are offered the opportunity to renew their voter registration. Okay, so keep that in line. Political efficacy plays a big role in this as well. And that's kind of your efficacy, your political efficacy is like the idea of it's your attitude as far as how your vote is counted. Okay. So a person who has high political efficacy, they are generally more likely to vote because they feel that their vote matters more. Okay. People like my older brother who choose not to vote. So he is a cannot voter, or not a cannot voter. He's just a not a voter, right? He's not a cannot because he chooses not to, but it's the idea that you feel like what you're doing matters. Okay, that's efficacy. All right. Other things that affect voter turnout deal with the type of election. So like midterm elections, like what we had here in November, when it's just congressional, like the House of Representatives and maybe a US Senator and maybe some state issues, generally speaking, in midterms, people are less likely to vote. We don't see as high of a voter turnout. People are more likely to vote in presidential years. Why? What's with the drop off? Why would people be more likely to vote in the presidential years?
Because presidential elections get people all fired up.
Yeah, it gets the people going, right? People get real excited about presidential elections. Again, even though I told you guys in class that I would say the congressional elections probably have a greater impact on your day-to-day life and some of the local things. But nonetheless, also I would say that presidential elections probably get more media attention too, right? Trying to rally the people up, get them going, so on and so forth. But generally speaking, again, we will see less voter turnout during the midterms. Okay, we see a higher turnout during the presidential voting during presidential campaign years. Okay, again, we talked both through these two federal laws to be aware of. Again, these are things that are trying to break down some of the barriers to allow more people to vote. Again, Voting Rights Act of 1965 deals with the banning of literacy tests. You guys took one of those in class last year as juniors, so you're familiar with that. And then the Motor Voter Act, we just touched on that. Okay, we've touched on some of these demographic characteristics already as well. That education and I suppose age and income are factors in this. Generally speaking, I mean, I would say the most common age group that votes are probably those that are older, those that are maybe getting close to retirement, Social Security age, again, because people get really concerned about that. I would also say that voting tends to be high amongst like younger voters, like first-time voters, because they're excited they get to vote. Okay. Reasons for why people vote, or how they choose to vote, like a lot of it has to do with party identification. That's a big one. And then if you have strong beliefs, say about like religion, genders, race relations, other things, those individuals tend to have a higher voting turnout, and that affects their voting choice as well. Okay, getting into political parties quickly. Again, political parties and interest groups are very similar. Difference between interest groups and political parties is what?
Interest groups like will pay for campaigns for their ideas to be passed.
Yeah, they try to influence what types of laws are being passed. For sure they do. Do interest group people, if you work for an interest group, do you run for office?
Probably not.
Probably not. No. Again, that's political parties. Okay, now again, both of these are examples of linkage institutions. Linkage institutions are those bodies that kind of connect people with their policymakers. So that could be a political party, that could be an election, that could be an interest group, that could be the media. Okay, those are bodies that again connect people to allow them to participate, in trying to influence what policies are being passed. Again, so political parties, elections, interest groups, the media, those are all things that play a factor. Again, party identification, electioneers, interest groups. So again, those bodies that have some sort of particular agenda, whether it's gun control, not gun control, abortion, not abortion, whatever. And then the media, again, depending on the news station that people tend to watch, that is something that allows them to, find out what is going on and ultimately maybe cast a vote in one form or another. Other things that affect our electorate or our voting population. Again, we've talked about education already. Again, education, people, if they know what's going on, if they know there's an election, they're more likely to vote. We talk about the get out the vote message, where sometimes campaigns will pay people to literally spread the word about election day. Okay. The idea of buying votes, though, that is illegal. Politicians are not supposed to pay people to vote for them. I'm not saying it's probably never happened before, because I'm sure in some shape, way, or form it probably has, but neither here nor there. Party platforms are a big one as well. Again, what the party ultimately hopes to accomplish and some of those things. Okay. Over the course of time, again, our parties have changed immensely. And recently, one of the biggest changes is parties have shifted to a more candidate-centered campaign, where, again, the attention is on the candidate, trying to draw attention to them in some shape, way, or form to get name recognition out there. And again, the way parties ultimately, why their platforms have changed, could deal with critical elections where there's something really important going on. So like right around the time of 9/11, in 2008, you had the financial crisis, other things as well. And again, we usually see some sort of maybe a regional realignment. So again, at one point in time, the Southern United States was very Democrat, and now they're very much not. Okay. They vote very red now, much more conservative. So again, that's an example of that regional alignment as well. So things to keep in mind there. Again, parties, they have access and they use whatever data they can, to, polling and such to determine where their candidate should be spending more of their time campaigning. We'll talk about some of that here in just a second. All right. Questions on that? Any of those things? Again, trying to go quickly here, because again, our 40 minutes seems to always go pretty fast. Questions? Excuse me. All right. Hearing no questions and hearing no bingos, we'll continue. Third parties. So again, Democrat, Republicans, we hear a lot about them. The third parties like the Libertarian Party or the Green Party, those smaller minor parties, again, they usually have a very, I guess, a unique set of platforms, or a platform in general. But again, third parties, we don't see them winning a lot of elected seats. And reasons for that, again, especially at the national level, the fact that we have a winner take all electoral system, again, what that means is when it goes to like presidential elections, every state, with the exception of Maine and Nebraska, they have to give all their electoral votes to one candidate. So they cannot split their electoral votes. So that's what we're getting at there. And the other thing is this too, is the Democrat and Republican parties, like they know, like there's some popularity, especially with the Libertarian Party. Okay. There is some popularity out there for them. And so both parties, to try to convince voters to vote for their candidate, it might include bits and pieces of the Libertarian platform to try to get some of those voters. Okay. So keep that in mind. But generally speaking, third parties are not as well funded. Major corporations maybe don't donate as much to the smaller parties because again, chances are, for the past 100 years, it's either going to be a Democrat or a Republican that's going to win the election. And so generally speaking, the candidates of those two parties are more well-funded. They enjoy a greater rate of campaign monies, things of that nature. Okay. Getting into the interest groups, I think I feel like all of you are pretty familiar with that. Again, interest groups do not run for political office, but they lobby, they try to influence politicians that are in office. Interest groups, what they might do is they, oftentimes there's like a membership fee, perhaps like for something such as the NRA, they collect those membership fees and then they might use that money to, they might donate that money to certain campaigns of politicians who share the same value and the same idea that they do. Okay. Again, NRA, pro-gun ownership. We can talk about MAD or SAD, whatever it's called now, MAD, Mothers Against Destructive Decisions. Again, all those are interest groups. Okay. And again, their main goal is to try to lobby. Okay. They lobby politicians a variety of ways, trying to influence how they will vote on legislation pertaining to that specific interest. Again, interest groups usually donate money to various campaigns. And if there's politicians that accept that money and then don't vote that way, well, chances are they're probably not enjoying any more of that money. But interest groups also will spread the get out the vote message, trying to encourage people to go out and vote. Again, we'll see a lot of that coming here in the next year and a half or so as we gear up for another presidential election in 2024. Again, this summer, I'd imagine we'll start seeing the process of the Republican Party trying to find a nominee for the 2024 election. Okay. We've talked iron triangles and issue networks in the past. Again, an iron triangle is the relationship between Congress, the bureaucracy, and interest groups and kind of that relationship. Again, interest groups, what they hope to get from Congress are favorable laws. What Congress hopes to get from the interest groups are money for their campaigns. When it comes to the bureaucracy, the interest groups are hoping to get favorable legislation. And the bureaucracy is hoping to get from the interest groups, hoping to get, favorable things, ideas, maybe for regulations to pass, that type of thing. Okay. Again, issue network is very similar, kind of looking at that relationship between our public officials, our interest groups, and our bureaucracy. Again, variety of things that interest group influence may be impacted by. Could come down to the equality of political and economic resources. We also have the free rider program. Okay, I know this is something that in econ, Mr. Norman screams about for days on end. But the free rider is this. So the example even in here has to deals with education, which is perfect. So at the school, I'll tell you guys, like right now, the teachers are in negotiation. Every 2 years, teachers get to negotiate for pay raises, benefits, whatever. Okay. And they negotiate with the school board. So the school's union, the CCEA, if you ever hear that on the announcements or on the intercom, that there's a CCEA meeting after school today in the media center. The CCEA, then all the teachers that are members of that, they pay, it's like $600 a year. They're a part of the union. And then every couple of years, there's negotiations and hopefully there's a pay raise. Okay. Union members also get some added insurances like life and health insurance and some other things. But so there's other benefits to it other than just the negotiations. But every 2 years, there's a negotiation. The CCEA nominates people to negotiate contracts. I'm sure you might know who a couple of those teachers are that do the negotiations, because most of you have had both of them as teachers since you've been in high school. And every couple of years, they negotiate. Hopefully, there's a pay raise for the teachers. Now, not every teacher in the building is a part of the union. Okay, that's just what it is. You cannot force union people to join the union. I mean, I'd say maybe some strong arming and some encouragement to get people to join. But let's say you have teacher A, union member, pays their $600 a year dues, and you have teacher B, a non-union member, doesn't pay their $600 a year dues. When that negotiation takes place, do the union member and non-union member enjoy the same pay raise?
Yes.
Yes, and herein lies the free rider. Okay. Teacher B is a free rider. They're enjoying the benefits of those that paid their union membership with the negotiation. Teacher A as well, a paid member. So that's the free rider program. So that's an example associated with interest groups that sometimes there's a favorable law passed. So like use the NRA for an example, just because I think that's a widely known one as far as what they do. If they get some legislation passed that is pro-gun ownership, well, even if you're not an NRA member, you don't pay your whatever it is a year, you still enjoy the, that law, I guess, okay, and based on your views. Questions on the free rider? All right, again, other groups that can influence policy outcomes other than interest groups. I mean, lobbying is the big one. How elections are set up, legal actions, going public, so on and so forth. We have some different groups that exist, like the single issue groups. That'd be like the NRA. You have various ideological and social movements. So that could be like the Me Too movement or Occupy Wall Street. Perhaps Black Lives Matter, I guess, would be another form of that. And they use various forms of protest to bring attention to their issue. Okay. So keep that in mind as well here. All right. Getting back into now the politics of things and talking about presidential elections. Again, presidential elections every 4 years. 22nd Amendment says presidents can only serve 2 terms. Presidential election is a little bit different than other elections in the United States because we then use the Electoral College. Again, Electoral College is the idea that states are given a point value based on the number of people they send to Congress. Like North Dakota, we send 2 senators and 1 representative to Congress. We are worth 3 electoral votes. Okay. Generally speaking, there's some things here. Again, we've talked about incumbency advantage before. Incumbency advantage is the idea that the current office holder, if they run for re-election, people know their name. Name recognition is a big deal when it comes to elections. And if you have an incumbent running, they enjoy an advantage because people know their name. Now, does that mean incumbents always win? No, we saw in 2020 an incumbent president not win. So it is possible. Okay. And they have a better chance of winning. Okay. Again, nomination process, parties, whether you're talking president or whether you're talking Congress, parties can only nominate 1 person per seat. The way that this is usually happens, excuse me, is through a primary. Again, in North Dakota, we use what's called an open primary where people go, and it's usually happens in June. Usually happens in June. So it'll be June of 2024, I suppose, would be our next primary election. But in North Dakota, we have an open primary. Okay. The only rule is that with election laws in North Dakota, if you go and vote in a primary, in partisan elections, you can only vote for members of 1 party. Now, again, do primary elections actually elect candidates? The answer to that is simply
No.
no. It's for the nomination process. Okay. The winning of the election happens in November. Okay. That's what you call the general election. But in North Dakota, we use a primary. Okay. We use an open primary. People are allowed to go and vote. Okay. Again, in partisan things, though, you have to vote for only members of 1 party. Some states use a closed primary, which basically means you have to be a registered member of that Republican or Democrat party. And you go and you do the same thing. You whittle down to the candidates. Some states like Iowa use a caucus, which again, all of these things, these 3 serve the same purpose, seniors. It's simply for the purpose of electing or nominating, not electing, nominating a candidate for office. Again, it gets used for the president. It gets used for congressional seats. Again, it's the way the parties determine who they are going to nominate for the ballot on a general election. Okay. Because again, they can only nominate 1 person. All right. Questions on that? Generally speaking, then there is a party convention. At those conventions, that's when the candidates are officially announced. Again, per partisan position, parties can only elect 1 person or nominate. I should be careful. I use my words. They can only nominate 1 person for each partisan position. Again, the general election then is the election that decides who's going to be the office holder, right? We have those every 2 years in November. And every 4 years, it's a presidential year. So our next general election in November of 2024 will be a presidential election. Getting back into the Electoral College. Again, every state has members of the Electoral College. I could not tell you who the members in North Dakota are, because I don't know. It doesn't matter. They're not like big name people. It's not like Doug Burgum and John Hovind are the electors. There's other people. But again, the way the Electoral College works, just really quick, the people of each state, they vote that Tuesday after the first Monday in November, and the electors then they look at the voting results. In North Dakota, if more people vote for the Republican candidate, and again, this only affects presidential elections. If more people vote for the Republican candidate for president, that indicates to our 3 electors that when they meet in Washington, D.C. in like December or January, that they are to cast their votes for that candidate. Again, I'm pretty sure every state now, North Dakota included, has what are called faithless elector laws, where if a member of the Electoral College decides to not cast their vote for the indicated candidate by the state results, there's criminal action that can be taken. But again, to win the electoral votes, you got to win 270 of them. That's the constitutional majority, because there's 538 total electoral votes to be had. In the event that neither candidate wins 270 votes, what happens? Do we revote?
No.
What happens,
Doesn't
Micah?
it go to the House?
It does go to the House, Micah. Very good. You make me proud, young man. Indeed. Okay. When it comes down to presidential elections, again, candidates are going to spend a lot of their time campaigning in swing states or battleground states. Again, a swing state is a state that could go either way. Historically, what are some of the swing states in the United States? Is California a swing state?
No,
Is North Dakota a swing state?
no,
Is Florida a swing state?
yes,
Yes. Okay. And oftentimes states that are swing states are also battleground states. There's a number of electoral votes to be had there. And, candidates will spend time, campaigning there, a substantial amount more time. Again, the Republican president or Republican nominee for president, they're probably not going to spend a lot of time in North Dakota giving speeches. Because, again, I've made the joke before, the Republicans could put Donald Duck on the ballot in North Dakota and people would probably still vote for Donald Duck. Okay. I don't say that to be mean. I say that because look at the state history. It's been a very conservative state overall when it comes to presidential elections. I mean, same could be said about California. They could put Daffy Duck on the ballot for the Democrat spot and the Californians would probably still vote for Daffy Duck. Okay. Moving along here, scrolling back up. Again, every state with the exception of Maine and Nebraska are winner take all states. Maine and Nebraska split theirs. So again, Nebraska is worth 5 electorals. Maine, I believe, is worth 4. They can split some of their electoral votes up. Okay. So they can give some votes to the Democrat candidate or to the Republican or vice versa. But every other state is winner take all, meaning that when a person wins that state, they get more popular votes. That state is to give all of their electoral votes to that candidate. If the electors decide not to do that, there's criminal action in most cases, right? Again, Electoral College only used for the president. Again, biggest downfall or biggest argument against the Electoral College is that it is possible for a candidate to have more total popular votes, meaning more people raise their hand, check the box for that person, and lose. It happened as recently as 2016 with Hillary Clinton, who in fact had 2 million more votes than President Trump. She lost the election because he won the majority of the electoral votes. It's just the way the cookie crumbles. It's happened a handful of times in history, but not many times. Okay, questions on that? All right, incumbency advantage in Congress is still a thing. Again, we already established that midterm elections, when we're electing only congressional seats, and some state and local things have a lower voter turnout. Every 2 years, we elect an entire House of Representatives, and every 2 years, we elect 1/3 of the Senate. Again, U.S. senators serve a 6-year term. We're going to skip modern campaigns, and we're going to get into the big one, campaign finance. Again, this is not my forte, but understand this. There was a law passed in the early 2000s called the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act of 2002. We will call it BICRA, okay? And BICRA had a lot to do with when political ads could be published, and it dealt with monies that could be given by political action committees, PACs, to candidates and campaigns and that type of thing, okay? And so there was some differences with that, like as far as who would endorse various campaign ads. Generally speaking, that's why you always hear like this ad was paid for by the Friends of Doug Burgum. This ad was paid for by the North Dakota Corn Growers Association. This ad was paid for by the NRA, you know, whatever. Okay. That's political action committee stuff in a way to kind of supersede some of the campaign finance laws. Now, the BICRA, okay, what it did, it had a lot to do with too when certain ads could be published. And so if you remember correctly, Citizens United, who did they want to put a video out about? Kind of dissing on that person.
Hillary.
Yeah, Hillary. They wanted to put a movie out on television called Hillary, which was more or less attacking Hillary Clinton leading up to the 2008 campaign. The FEC, our Federal Election Commission, okay, a part of the federal bureaucracy that oversees all federal election laws, they said you cannot do that. Okay, don't do that. Well, Citizens United takes the FEC to court, vice versa. Okay. And then you have the very controversial ruling in Citizens United versus the Federal Election Commission. And this had a number of moving parts. Okay. But more or less, here's what I would remember about it. The Supreme Court, they rule in favor of Citizens United. They say that Citizens United as an organization, or if it was a corporation, or if it was a labor union, that as a body, as a person, political contributions are a form of free speech, okay? And those contributions are protected under the First Amendment. The big thing with Citizens United, it is a free political speech case dealing with money as a speech, in which the Supreme Court says contributions to not going directly to campaigns or even going to campaigns, that is a form of free speech. And so this kind of changes like where money can go and where it can't go. But more or less, the big story is freedom of political speech, First Amendment. Okay. And we talk about PACs and super PACs. Again, they're very similar in how they operate. But a PAC, okay, there are limits to how much a PAC can donate directly to a candidate or a party in elections. Okay. They raise money in hoping to support a candidate or a party. Again, it's a form of an interest group. Okay. And there's limitations to how much they can raise. Super PACs, on the other hand, this is something that, you know, this is why Citizens United takes some heat, is it allows for the creation of super PACs, which is simply a PAC on the juice, on the gear, on the roids. And super PACs can donate unlimited amounts of money as long as they don't donate it directly to the candidate. Okay, so that's a big outcome of Citizens United with the hard money, the soft money, and where the political contributions can go. All right, questions on that? I'm kind of trying to wrap up here the last 2 minutes. A little bit about the media. Again, the media has become, I mean, there's only a couple of big media companies anymore that own all the news. And so we can talk about like media consolidation. But the big ones here to know are about the gatekeeper, okay, drawing issues to a certain or attention to certain governmental issues. And then the idea of horse race journalism, okay, that the media has become like obsessed with sharing polling results and trying to give people an idea of who might win elections, right? You see it. If you watch the presidential election night a couple of years ago, oh my gosh, well, this person's going to win here. This is what the polls say. And they start making predictions based on the polls. And what's really funny is when they are wrong. I get a kick out of that, but that's horse race journalism. Again, the advent of 24-hour news is something that's become more common too, and how people connect with what the government is doing. Again, media consolidation, another big idea of various media outlets kind of merging and that type of thing. Okay, so I'd be aware of that. I'm going to stop the share. I'm going to stop the recording.